In the 6th century BCE, the Kingdom of Egypt was an unassailable fortress. For thousands of years, their eastern frontier was guarded by the city of Pelusium, a heavily fortified choke point acting as the gate of Egypt. An army marching from Asia had to pass through this exact bottleneck. The young pharaoh Psamtik III stood atop these walls with absolute confidence. He had the high ground, a fortified garrison, and the most lethal archers in the ancient world. Marching toward them was Cambyses II, the ruthless king of the Persian Empire. By all laws of traditional warfare, a direct assault on Pelusium should have been a meat grinder for the Persians. But Cambyses didn't look at the fortifications. He looked at the software running inside the minds of the Egyptian soldiers. He launched an attack using an early, radical form of psychological warfare, and he did it by weaponizing a common household pet. To understand why a professional, highly disciplined military froze at the sight of a house cat, you have to look past the surface-level myth and crack open the absolute legal and spiritual source code of ancient Egypt. In the 6th century BCE, Egyptian society did not view religion as a passive weekend ritual. It was a structural reality. It was the law of Ma'at, the fundamental cosmic order holding the universe together. And inside that cosmic order, no animal held a more terrifyingly absolute spiritual status than the cat. Cats were not merely companions or utilitarian mouse hunters. They were revered as the literal living avatars of Bastet, the fiercely protective goddess of the home, fertility, and the pharaoh's own divine lineage. The legal framework protecting these animals was completely unyielding. Under Egyptian law, the killing of a cat, even if entirely by accident, carried a mandatory death penalty. If a Roman citizen accidentally killed a cat in Egypt, a furious mob would form instantly, dragging the offender to execution without a trial, completely ignoring any pleas from the pharaoh to prevent a diplomatic crisis. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus recorded that when a house caught fire in Egypt, the occupants wouldn't even attempt to throw water on the flames. Instead, the men would form a tight human perimeter around the burning building, entirely focused on preventing the cats from running back into the fire. If a family cat died of natural causes, the entire household went into deep ritualistic mourning, shaving off their own eyebrows as a public display of grief. The bodies of these animals were painstakingly mummified, wrapped in fine linen, and buried in sacred state catacombs. Cambyses II was not just a conqueror, he was a master strategist of human behavior. He realized that this absolute religious reverence was a massive, unpatched software vulnerability waiting to be exploited. The Egyptians had a hard-coded line of spiritual logic: protect the sacred at all costs. Cambyses didn't need to break through their shields. He had to find a way to make their own sacred law completely paralyze their ability to fight back. When the Persian army finally deployed across the low, dusty plains of Pelusium, the Egyptian archers atop the ramparts raised their heavy composite bows. These men were the elite kinetic weapon of the ancient world, capable of launching a coordinated rhythmic hail of arrows that could darken the sky and decimate infantry lines before they even touched the city walls. The archers drew back their strings, took aim at the massive approaching dust cloud, and prepared to release a devastating opening salvo. But as the Persian lines closed the distance and emerged from the haze, the entire Egyptian front line froze in absolute, paralyzed horror. Cambyses II hadn't just studied Egyptian religion, he had engineered a literal, physical manifestation of it on the battlefield. According to historical accounts compiled by the Macedonian author Polyaenus, the Persian king had gathered thousands of cats, along with ibises, dogs, and sheep, every animal sacred to the Egyptian pantheon, and placed them at the absolute vanguard of his attacking phalanx. But Cambyses didn't stop at livestock logistics. He understood the psychological power of visual branding. He ordered every single soldier in his frontline divisions to painstakingly paint the high-contrast, recognizable silhouette of the cat goddess Bastet directly onto their leather and bronze shields. Look at the mechanics of this tactical position. It was a flawless psychological checkmate. The Egyptian soldiers were trapped in a brutal cognitive loop. If they loosed their arrows, the kinetic energy of their bows would inevitably pierce, mutilate, or kill the living cats held in front of the Persian warriors, or strike a shield bearing the sacred likeness of the goddess. To the highly conditioned Egyptian mind, losing a battle meant an earthly defeat, a temporary political setback. But killing a cat meant instant execution by their own state and a permanent, terrifying damnation in the halls of the afterlife. The Persians had successfully hacked the enemy's moral framework, transforming their deepest devotion into a literal physical armor. The deadliest archers in the Mediterranean stood perfectly still, their bows taut, their fingers shaking, unable to release a single string. When a military's primary weapon is neutralized by a psychological exploit, the failure isn't gradual. It's a sudden, systemic collapse. At the gates of Pelusium, the tactical utility of Egypt's towering mud brick walls dropped to absolute zero without the Persians firing a single siege engine. The Egyptian garrison wasn't out-hustled, outmaneuvered, or outgunned. They were outcoded. As the Persian phalanx marched entirely unscathed across the killing zones, the psychological paralysis on the ramparts rapidly mutated into a contagion of panic. Orders from Pharaoh Psamtik III's generals were swallowed by the chaos. Soldiers looked to their left and right, watching their comrades drop their weapons rather than risk striking a sacred animal. The discipline that had held the Egyptian empire together for millennia dissolved in a matter of minutes. The garrison abandoned the battlements, fleeing inward into the city streets as the Persian vanguard breached the gates. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a routing. The ancient Macedonian strategist Polyaenus wrote that Cambyses II stood by, watching his troops easily cut down the retreating, weaponless Egyptians. The Nile Delta, which should have been a fortress of attrition for the invaders, became a highway. Over 50,000 Egyptian soldiers fell in the panicked retreat, compared to a mere 7,000 Persian casualties. The surviving Egyptian forces, including the young pharaoh himself, fled down the river network to barricade themselves inside the heavily fortified capital of Memphis. But the psychological damage was already absolute. The aura of divine pharaonic protection had vanished. When Cambyses reached the walls of Memphis, the siege was brief. The city fell, Psamtik III was captured, and just like that, thousands of years of native, independent Egyptian sovereignty came to an abrupt, permanent end. The entire keys to the Nile were handed over to a foreign empire, all because an invading king realized that the tightest knot holding a civilization together can also be used as a noose. The Battle of Pelusium is routinely remembered in popular history as a bizarre anomaly, a historical joke frequently dubbed the War of the Cats. But when you strip away the surface-level absurdity and analyze the mechanics of the conflict through a purely tactical lens, a profound and terrifying rule of geopolitical strategy emerges. Cambyses II did not defeat Egypt because he had better iron, larger battalions, or superior logistics. He won because he understood a fundamental truth about human systems. Every great civilization is powered by an invisible, unyielding cultural software. This software consists of the unshakable values, religious laws, and deep-seated moral taboos that dictate how a society behaves. It's the code that binds a population together, builds their monuments, and establishes their laws. But because this code is absolute, it's also highly predictable. And in the theatre of asymmetric warfare, absolute predictability is a fatal design flaw. If an invading general understands your cultural programming deeply enough, they don't need to shatter your physical defenses. They can simply hack your operational source code, turning your deepest devotion, your highest virtues, and your absolute laws into the exact instruments of your structural paralysis. This is the unifying cold mathematics behind the geography of war. The terrain of conflict isn't merely composed of physical landscapes. True strategy requires mastering every layer of the operational environment. As we've seen across history, the Swiss brilliantly engineered the vertical geometry of the Alps to make physical invasion an unprofitable equation. The Shona architects of Great Zimbabwe mastered the laws of pure friction and thermodynamics to build a self-healing, climate-controlled stone empire. But at the gates of Pelusium, the Persians proved that the most critical terrain of all is the landscape of the enemy's mind. They demonstrated that the strongest armor a civilization builds to protect its soul can, with a single stroke of psychological insight, be transformed into its ultimate noose. Sovereignty belongs only to those who can defend both their physical borders and their psychological code. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and let me know in the comments. If a modern adversary tried to exploit the unshakable values of your society today, what would our cat flank look like? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next investigation.